Okay, so I'm here with Jeremy Paterson, and we're talking today about ADHD. And I guess the first thing I was wondering, Jeremy, was what age were you when you first found out or discovered that you had ADHD?
I was not diagnosed until I was an adult. I think I was in my early 40s, or actually around 43 when I was diagnosed with ADHD.
Why did it take kind of that long to get that diagnosis?
I think, well, basically because nobody picked it up earlier. I suffered from very bad anxiety most of my life, and um, as well as some classical ADHD symptoms, which for some reason the GPs just never picked up. So I was never referred to a specialist.
Right. So you basically went through your whole life having ADHD and not knowing that you had it.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep.
So can you tell me a little bit about what it was like as a child? Like going, when you look back on now, I mean, obviously now you understand in hindsight that you were a kid with ADHD.
Mm.
At the time, you didn't know. What was the experience that you were having? What was it like to be a child with ADHD, but to not know or understand what was going on?
Well, when I think back, I had very classic ADHD symptoms as a child. I was hyperactive. I did terribly at school. I couldn't retain any information. Um, as as I got older, I would spend, like in class, for instance, I'd spend most of the day staring out the window, daydreaming. So I went through bouts of getting into serious trouble at school and at home as well. And I was seen as a naughty child, as a misbehaving child, and a extremely wayward, rebellious teenager who was basically dumb, stupid, because I did so poorly at school. And not only were my academic achievements bad, but also my social interactions were not always great either.
What I'm wondering is whether you can go into detail, a little bit more detail about, you know, what kind of behavior other people would have seen, or, I guess what those experiences were like a little bit more specifically when you're talking about, struggling at school and seen as naughty and those kinds of things, just as much as you feel comfortable.
Yeah, well, I struggled with I guess you could call it inappropriate behavior. My ability to socialize with others was quite impaired by the simple fact that I I often said things that were inappropriate, or not fitting in with the situation. So that sort of put me at odds with a lot of my peers, and definitely with teachers, and also with family members as well. And often uh, when there were repercussions for some of that behavior, some of the things that I may have said that were out of turn, I couldn't understand why, which would often result in me getting angry and frustrated and rebellious, and it caused a lot of upset and hurt throughout my younger years.
So when you're saying that you're saying things that were not really appropriate, was it sort of that impulsive stuff where you're, you know, I don't know, like saying things that were rude or people would find to be rude or offensive? Is that?
Yeah, it could be that, not overly so, but it could just be I could there could be silence in a room, and I might just make a sudden really loud noise just to give people a fright, just to I don't know, just to get attention, I guess, or to give people a fright, or also it was quite it was kind of random. Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, with ADHD, there's often there's obviously impulsivity, but there's also seems to be this desire to shock people, eh?
Definitely.
That is and there's almost like an enjoyment or pleasure or out of doing that. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I grew out of that as I got older, but as a child, that was that was a big thing for me. So as I got into my 20s, that became less noticeable, and other symptoms sort of came to the surface.
Yeah, so you also mentioned that you struggled academically. Like, how did you go at school? Like, where did you, do you feel comfortable, if only if you feel comfortable
No,
talking
it's
about it?
fine. I left school pretty much as soon as I could. As soon as I turned 15, I left school. I had never passed any exam, or I didn't even really hand in assignments or work, so it was pointless. I felt that it was pointless for me being at school at the time, and I wasn't getting anything out of it, and so I left.
And for you, like the naughty behavior that teachers maybe or parents or whoever made, what sorts of things might they have seen you doing that they described as naughty?
Well, refusing to do work, for instance, simply because I found it too difficult. I found it too hard to concentrate on work for long periods of time. And when you're getting constantly criticized, for not doing stuff, or for not being good enough, you tend to, your behavior spirals out of control. So I would often become more disruptive, and I would often get into fights at school. And so violence became a normal part of my life, as a child and as a teenager. Um, so yeah, so that sort of all came together to create this image that society didn't like very much.
Right. So quite an angry kid.
I, be I became angry. Yeah, yeah, I became extremely angry as time went on.
Yeah. Um, and what were I mean, I imagine, I guess you were getting a lot of response from adults, opinions from adults, messages from adults about what kind of person you were and who you were. How did how did it affect your self-esteem or what you thought about yourself?
Well, I started to believe it, really. So um, I started to believe that I was dumb. I started to believe that I was dysfunctional. I started to believe that I was just a bad kid, a bad person, and would never amount to anything, and would spend the rest of my life either in jail or being an underachiever. So that's the mindset that I developed, and I'm not to blame anybody, because there was a lack of understanding in those days. So I can understand why people thought that way, But I like to think that today we're gaining a better understanding, so we can understand people better, and treat them better as well.
It must also hurt, though, a wee bit looking back that there was not one adult that even questioned whether there might be anything else going on.
Well, there was not really. I mean, I don't recall ever hearing of ADHD when I was a kid, and I doubt whether many adults had heard of it either. So, and GPs certainly never suggested, Actually, come to think of it, every time that I went to the GP as a kid, it was for a specific illness. It was never about my behavior. So um, GPs would never pick it up, and they probably wouldn't have back then anyway. In fact, there's a good chance that they may still not pick it up. So, which is unfortunate that there's not better training for GPs around such things as ADHD. Mm.
Yeah, so I mean, going forward into your adult years, because we're talking like, a good 23 years as an adult with undiagnosed ADHD. How did it have an impact on you as an adult, going from first as a young man and then kind of into your, well into your 40s?
Yeah. So by the time I was a young man, I had serious self-esteem issues, and I developed a addiction, serious alcohol addiction. Um, uh, I was arrested several times for crimes, and nothing serious. I never actually spent any time in prison, but I was arrested a number of times for drink driving and fighting in public and sort of behavior like that. And and I of course I couldn't actually hold down jobs either. So my employment was on and off, and often didn't last very long when it was on. So I spent a lot of time on a benefit, a lot of time drinking, a lot of time just being a menace, I guess, to society, to, well, what would be considered a menace to society. Yeah.
And do you think you thought of yourself that way as well?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, it got to the stage where, like I said before, that I had started to believe the things that were said about me. So I that's what I was. And I don't think I was a bad person. I don't think even society considered me so much to be a bad person, because I wasn't really I wasn't selling drugs, I wasn't murdering, raping, and I'd get into fights, but it was always, it wasn't that I was brutal or horrible. I was basically just a bum, really. I think that's what society saw me as a useless bum. Yeah.
And I guess as and you did try to turn that around even before you were diagnosed.
I was constantly trying to improve myself, constantly coming up with plans and ways to make myself better and to be successful in a career. But to no avail. I couldn't, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stick with plans. It was difficult enough to make plans, let alone stick with them and implement them and organize my life. So my life was incredibly disorganized in every area. Yeah.
So from and in terms of I guess a career or job, as but between the ages of 20 to 43, how did undiagnosed, how did it affect studies and jobs?
Well, I had tried to study a few times and I failed miserably. And jobs, I struggled with.
So sorry, just to clarify with the when you say you failed miserably, you mean you failed the thing, or you dropped out of it, or didn't complete it?
Generally, I dropped out because I found learning so difficult. I found it so hard to retain information. So I would be all optimistic and think, oh, this is what I'm going to do. And then I would head off and I'd roll and I'd do this course. But like after the first couple of weeks, I'd realized that I was learning nothing because it was just going in one ear and out the other. And I just couldn't retain the information. Still struggle with daydreaming was a big thing. If I had to sit in the class, I would get bored almost instantly. So I would automatically drift off into a daydream that I couldn't bring myself out of. So, which made it very hard, or actually for me, impossible. Sorry, impossible.
Just wait till you finish them.
Which made it virtually impossible to learn anything. Yep.
So and like I imagine, like when you're, so that's listening in class, when you're actually writing assignments or that, what was that like? What from an ADHD brain, I guess, which of course you didn't know you had. What when it came to writing assignments, what was the struggle?
Well, for me, the struggle was just getting started. Because I tended to procrastinate on anything that I didn't want to do, which was practically everything. That wasn't fun, that didn't involve fun. The other thing was organizing. Say I was writing an assignment, I could not organize the content or put it together in a coherent manner. It was all over the place. Yeah.
So, and just to ask about relationships as well, because you said that when you were a kid, you know, it really was hard to socialize with ADHD. What got in the way of socialize? What was it specifically that maybe didn't connect you with other people?
I think I was often seen as somebody who was yeah, maybe when I was younger, silly, maybe. Weird. I was probably seen as weird. I don't know. Um, yeah, and impulsive, which a lot of people find uncomfortable to be around impulsive people who do stupid things. Like maybe we'd just be talking, I'll just jab you in the stomach. Yeah. Really silly, but it's just the sort of stupid stuff that I did, which is not conducive to making friends.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, because often people with ADHD often have a really good sense of humor.
Yeah, I had a good sense of humor, a little bit wild at times, and like I said, sometimes often not to everybody's taste. Sometimes a bit over the top.
Right. So it's kind of a sense of humor that appealed to you, but not necessarily the people around you.
I found myself hilariously funny, and many other people didn't. They thought I was just a thorn in their side or a pain in the backside, or a nuisance. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I guess so. As you going into your adult years, how did ADHD undiagnosed, of course, affect your relationships?
I developed friends. I made friends, similar to myself, a bit wayward, I guess. I had girlfriends, which never lasted very long. So yeah, I sort of tended to hang out with other so-called outcasts, if you want to call them that. But even then, I spent a lot of time alone. I actually quite enjoyed my own company. I felt safer in my own company than I did with other people. And I often felt extremely new. I kind of developed quite a severe social anxiety issue by the time I was an adult. So most people I felt uncomfortable around and didn't want to be around anyway.
And did that anxiety have a huge impact on, or contribution to the drinking?
I think so, yeah. I think it played a big part. I certainly felt better when I was drinking, and I felt happy and I felt confident, and I just felt like a different person. Unfortunately, the ADHD, it didn't take the ADHD away. So ADHD on top of the drinking sort of made me a bit crazy. My alcohol lowers inhibitions anyway, so alcohol coupled with ADHD is a recipe for disaster.
So I guess I'm also wondering, and again, just as much as you feel comfortable, what was your experience around like ADHD and its impact on your mental health? So other, I guess, mental health conditions.
Yep.
So because you mentioned anxiety. I don't know if you wanted to talk more about that or about depression or anything else that kind of happened in relation to that.
I went through many periods of deep, dark depression, but probably the worst for me was the anxiety, which was near constant and at times was so high. I was basically had a number of breakdowns over the years involving panic attacks, severe panic, severe anxiety that would last for days and sometimes weeks on end, and that was debilitating, to say the least. yeah, just a general sense of doom, and like there was no hope. There was no meaning to life. I often thought that death was just around the corner. I always thought that I was going to die young. I wasn't sure how, but I just didn't think that I deserved to live. So, and I thought, my life is going to end early, and I'm going to achieve nothing, and I'm going to be miserable and unhappy. And so my anxiety was constantly there, and it was horrible. It was just awful, feeling a sense of dread all the time, except for when I was drinking. Drinking actually made me feel better. But it would actually make me feel worse. Once I'd stop drinking, once, I'll wake up and the anxiety would be 100 times worse than it was before I drank.
So you're caught in a vicious cycle of like drinking to almost self-medicate the anxiety, and then wake up the next day with the alcohol withdrawing out of your body, and it would cause the anxiety to be even more intense. And then I guess at some point during the day you'd start drinking again.
Well, not every, because I tended not to have a job, so I was on a benefit, and in those days I think it was about $100 a week that I got. So I couldn't really afford to drink a lot. At that stage I tended to get really, really drunk on the weekends, like hideously drunk, and the rest of the week I'd be recovering, or just hanging out, doing nothing and mucking around. And so yeah, that was my life. It's not much of a life. It was a fairly uneventful life, but that was how it was for me back then.
So really a lot of suffering, a lot of unhappiness.
Yeah, a lot of unhappiness is caused by mental health, and my inability to function properly in life. I think anyone that's not functioning properly is going to get depressed and anxious, especially if it's for extended periods of time. Yeah.
I'm walking a tightrope between